have another creepy story for you. If you're somebody that has night terrors, this is one to scroll on. Don't watch this alone and don't watch it in the dark. This one comes from a lady called Alison, whose mum and dad used to own a construction company, and Alison grew up in a church. Her mum and dad were very religious. They used to go to church every Sunday, and so occasionally through their connection to the church, sometimes her dad would take on workers who were recovering from certain addictions. A lot of these men were only like in their early 20s, they'd had a rough start in life, and unfortunately a lot of them had become homeless. So when her mum and dad realised that a lot of these men were homeless and that after their shift with the dad they would just go and stay at like a shelter or sleep rough, they eventually decided to build something in their garden, like on their property, so that the men could stay there, and this was in an unofficial capacity. They just did this out of the goodness of their hearts so that these men had a place to stay. She says these rooms were not plush, they were not somewhere that you would want to stay for like an extended period of time, they were not somewhere that you would want to call home, they weren't super comfortable, but they were better than sleeping on the street. At some point they take on a guy called Paul, and Paul is also in recovery. He's a very hard worker and he ends up being one of her dad's best workers, and Paul at the time was not that much older than Alison and Alison's older brother. Her mum and dad would buy Paul Christmas presents and birthday presents, and he would come and spend Christmas, New Year's, all of the holidays at their house with their family. But Paul did have his own family. His biological family lived quite close by, and sometimes her family would see his family in the supermarket and things like that, and they would say hello to each other. Things were cordial, but they didn't know each other other than to say hello. Paul ends up doing really well for himself. He gets himself a flat, he has a girlfriend, and things look to be on the up. But one day he turns back up at their family home and he asks if somebody can stay at their house just for a short period of time till they sort themselves out because they have nowhere else to go. Her mum and dad say yes because they would never see somebody out on the street, but they are very surprised when an old woman turns up at the door. Not a young man, doesn't seem to be a recovering addict, but an old woman. Over the next few weeks, Paul pops down pretty much every day to check on this lady, and eventually her mum gets curious and she asks, who is that lady? And he kind of stutters and he says, that's my nan. And she just kind of assumes that his stuttering is just because he's a proud man and he feels kind of ashamed that his nan has fallen on tough times, and so she leaves it at that. The family just settle into the fact that they have this random older lady living at the bottom of their garden, but they rarely see her. She's not a problem, she isn't a burden, and every now and then the family would take like fresh towels and things like that down to her just to make sure that she was comfortable, and they would leave them outside the door because she would never answer the door. No one ever saw this woman leave her room. This is weird because the accommodation that they had, it was just a room. There was no shower, there was no toilet, there was literally nothing but a sink in the corner of the room. It was a shared, what you could call a kitchen, but it was very basic, and none of the other men that lived there ever saw this woman use the kitchen. They never saw any of her food in the fridge, nothing. The only reason that they knew that that woman was in there was because every night they would hear the same kind of crying, and it almost sounded like a newborn cry, and eventually the men complained so much, her dad has to just ask Paul, like, what's up with your nan? Like, what is the cry? Paul looks petrified at this, and he just says, yeah, I'm sorry, she has a cat. I know you're not supposed to have pets in there, but she has brought her cat with her, and her dad doesn't know what to say, so he just allows it because she's old. 1 month into the lady staying at the accommodation, they have their first OD in the entire time that the shelter has been open. She actually said that this broke her dad's heart. He never saw it coming. He was completely blindsided by it. He thought this guy was doing really, really well, and he held himself responsible. During this time, the family all start to have night terrors, and the night terrors all centre around the old lady. The entire family would have dreams of the old woman coming into the house, crawling up the walls and staring at them from the ceiling like a spider. That sometimes it was so real that even her dad would cry and beg his wife to look at the ceiling to make sure she wasn't there so that he could open his eyes. In other dreams, they would go into room 4, which was her room in the shelter, and they would open the door and they would find like certain rituals happening in there and bodily fluids spilt. They would dream of this woman dancing around flames, and they would see certain symbols in their dreams. Eventually 6 months had passed and they didn't know what to do about this old woman because they couldn't get her out. And remember, they have no actual reason to evict her, but no one had ever wanted to stay there for that long. Eventually, after another one of the residents' ODs, her dad and her mum just decided they're going to shut it. She said when her dad had to go and tell Paul that his nan will have to find somewhere else to live, Paul wasn't happy at all. He was like, what the hell am I going to do with her? Which none of them could understand, because at this point, Paul had a good job, he had a nice place to live. There was no reason that his nan couldn't go and live in a spare bedroom. Everyone else is really understanding, and the church in fact helps some of the guys find other places to live. And on the last day, the family invites all of the tenants in so that they can have a home-cooked meal and say proper goodbyes. All of the tenants turn up to the last dinner, apart from Paul's nan. And at this point, the entire family are feeling really uncomfortable about the fact that they haven't seen his nan leave, and so they're thinking she's still in there. Like, is she going to be decent? Are we going to see something we don't want to see? And they're scared of her because they've had really awful dreams. The entire family go down. They open the door, and what they see can only be described as something out of your worst nightmares. She said that the smell was absolutely horrendous. There was cat feces everywhere. There were stains all over the bed, dark brown stains, which They don't know what they were. Walls were completely scratched in places, and at first they looked like cat scratches, but when you looked closer, the claws were way too big to be cat scratches. Some of them even looked like some of the symbols that they saw in their dreams. Nightmares. Family go from feeling bad about Paul's nan to just feeling really angry that somebody could treat their property this way. Seems like Paul was also angry at the family because after that he never speaks to them again, but they do hear word on the curb from around the town that he is not doing well at all. In fact, he loses his nice house, he loses practically everything, his girlfriend leaves him. Eventually her dad hears that he is struggling with addiction again, and eventually the family get the sad news that he has also passed away. Even though the family were no longer close to Paul and they didn't speak, they decided that they should all go to the funeral and they should all pay their respects. One thing that they were really worried about is the fact that they were going to have to face his nan again and basically see the person that they chucked out, but also the person that destroyed their property. When they arrive at the church, his entire family is sitting at the front, everyone bar his nan. So they just kind of assume that maybe she's passed away too. In the day, the family get the shock of their lives when the nan does walk in, and they can tell by her body language that she doesn't know this family. You can tell she is a stranger to them. So her dad just takes it upon himself to go over and ask Paul's mum, do you know that woman over there? She seemed to be very close to Paul. I'm just wondering who she is to your family. And the mum says, I've never seen her before in my life. Goes on to tell Paul's mum about how he had lied about this woman being his nan, and she just says, yeah, he told a lot of lies. I don't know why he would have done that. So after a while of watching this old lady, they realise that the men around her just keep bringing her food and drink, and it's almost like they're treating her like a queen. For a while, her mum starts to get annoyed at the treatment that this woman is receiving after what she's done to their house. She's annoyed about the fact that this woman hasn't even said hello, she's not said thank you, she's not said sorry, nothing. She's just completely ignored them as though they didn't let her stay with them for like months on end. So she decides she's going to confront her. She's going to go over there and she's going to ask her why she trashed their house. As she gets closer, she's stopped dead in her tracks by one of the men. He steps in front of her to block her view of the woman and he says, hi. And the voice that speaks is a voice that the mum knows really well. It's the voice of one of the men that OD'd. It's not his body, it is not his face. She recognises him from his eyes and from his voice. She is taken aback and she says, do we know each other? And he says, no, I don't think we've met before. In that moment, she knew that whatever was going on with those boys and that old woman was not good, and she didn't want any part of it. And she turns around and she heads back to her family. And the creepiest part is that old woman, who was in her 80s back then, outlived both of her own parents. She is possibly even alive today. Somebody tell me what she was doing in that room. In fact, don't tell me.